Everyone's failed at something. You might have failed getting into med school, or you might have failed at med school. You might have failed getting into a particular job, role, or you might have failed getting a promotion. Failure is something that'll happen to all of us. That's the topic of discussion today, and we're going to be talking about how can we bounce back and process failure. So Abdul, let's talk a little bit about failure. First of all, actually, have you ever failed? What's one thing you failed at that you really felt and had to bounce back from?
So, and I've said it many times, but one of the biggest failures for me was after graduating medical school and not being able to become a junior doctor in London. We've talked about it many times, but for me, that was a big thing. I saw it personally as a failure because obviously we worked hard at medical school. I tried my best in exams and I was confident I'm going to be working in London as an F1. But to kind of open up the laptop that night and realize that I'm in the Midlands, 100 miles away from home, that was a big thing with failure. I don't know if you've had any failures or something a bit more recent.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, we'll go on to this in a little bit deeper, but we were even talking to Sam Desi, right, about failure is something that happens every single day, but I don't look at it as failures anymore. But if you said what's one failure that in the past that really hit me hard, it's probably when I intercalated at Imperial, and there was a assessment. The first assessment, I was bottom of the class. As an academic, as my pride and joy at that time was all in the academia world, and I was bottom of the set. And it took a lot for me to bounce back, and I had to process it all. Because there's loads of things to it, right? There's an emotional reaction, there's a physical reaction, then there's a... How do you actually then, do you bounce back or do you mope? Do you go into your bedroom, never come out? Do you have a strategy or do you just wander, essentially? So there's a lot to it, and I managed to claw it back. So I managed to claw it back from, I'll tell you what it was, this is a bit putting it all out there. So I got a 2-2, and I think I was the only one that got a 2-2 in the first exam. But I was one of 4 that got a first by the end of the year. So it took a lot. It took a lot to bounce back, and I made a lot of adjustments. And I think there's lessons that I can pass on from that experience as well. So yeah, let's talk about the first thing that happens when you fail. Abdul, what is it?
So the reason why this video I say is important is the problem with failure is the negative emotions that come with it. So the usual anger, disappointment, the anxiety, the stress, and if you don't deal with it correctly, what you will realize is it starts to affect your relationships, your decisions moving forward, and you never get to the root cause. So I think the first thing off the bat is to acknowledge those feelings. We all fail, like you said, on a daily basis, and it's important to not brush it aside, but to kind of welcome it. I know it's easier said than done, and understand, okay, these are the feelings I'm feeling. Because let's say a example of failure right now is A-level results have just come up. A lot of people missed out on the opportunity to come to university to study medicine. And we know how important that is at that age, right? And you're going to be feeling a lot of emotions. You're going to feel disappointed. You're going to feel angry. You're going to feel let down. I think acknowledge it. Acknowledge the fact that this was important. You need to understand that it's something you cared about deeply and not brush it aside or kind of sweep it under the rug. And I think that's the first step in kind of dealing with failure, is acknowledging the feelings you're feeling and the reasons why you're feeling.
Exactly. There's a saying, right? And also, don't make big decisions whilst feeling sort of in a heightened state of emotions. So like my first response to that particular set of results was, I want to quit. I went to my mum and I said, I want to drop out. I'm just going to leave the rest of the year and I'll go back to medicine next year after the intercalated year. And she was essentially like, you can do what you like. You can do what you like, but you need to think about this very carefully. And once the emotions and everything went by, it was back to the drawing board. All right, strategy time. How do I get out of this slump? So, emotions are very important. Acknowledge it, process it. And you know what? It's okay to just feel crap. Just accept it. Like, whether it's in your career, whether it's in your life outside of work or whatever it is, just sit, process, take it in, let out any emotions. Don't bottle up. That's one thing I always say. If you want to cry, you cry, man. There's nothing to be ashamed of in my books. So let out any emotions, talk to people, process what's happening. So that's emotions, and don't make big decisions. My number one tip at this moment is, if you've not gotten into med school or you've messed up exams at medical school or in a certain job, transitioning out in F1, F2, whatever it is, don't make a big decision like quitting or changing direction. First process first. What would you say comes next in that wave of fate after finding out you failed at something?
So once you kind of acknowledge the feelings you're experiencing because of failure, I think the thing that that naturally tends to happen is you go into a failure mindset. And what that means is, because you've experienced this one failure, you automatically can start to assume that everything you do as subsequently afterwards will also result in failure, which is never the case, right? So you will, let's say, fail to get into medical school, getting a medical degree, and then you start thinking, okay, I can't apply again. I'm a bad student. I didn't work hard. I'm not good at studying. I'm not good at revising. I'll never be a good doctor. And then it's like, okay, it's a gap here. Do you take a job? I'll never apply for this job, right? So that one failure, what it tends to do sometimes, it puts this belief of future failure. And I think the first thing I would say is certain events or certain failures are isolated. Just because you have failed this one thing, it doesn't mean everything you do afterwards also will result in failure. I don't know if you've ever had that mindset. For me, I kind of experienced it was, okay, I failed to get into London. Now I'm going to be working in Coventry. And then it means, oh, maybe I'm not a good enough doctor to work in London, so I'm not a good doctor. And then psychologically, it's quite powerful, man, because you're at work and you're thinking, I'm in this little village and I'm not a good doctor. You start failing your cannulas and your blood because you've built yourself up to be this failure. So I don't know if you've experienced or what you think about that.
It's difficult to pinpoint because that's such a common thing, right? At work, you failed the first cannula, you're more likely to fail your second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. And your confidence is low. Or say you were slow to diagnose something or pick something up, it knocks your confidence and you're likely to be slower ongoing. But I think what you said, right, it's a failure mentality that's not necessarily rational. Like you said, you failed through the application portal, and I think Jess says this actually. She said this point on the podcast where she goes, maybe in just that cohort I wasn't amongst those successful and I'll be better amongst the second cohort. So failure doesn't mean you're going to fail at everything. And if you wanted our Scrubbed In podcast, right, just go into Instagram, search up Scrubbed In. You could look at every single person there and say they're a failed doctor. Every single one is an entrepreneur of some sort. Some of them are still surgeons or in the medical field, but a lot of them aren't. Well, are they failed doctors then? They're all walking around with a smile on their face. Are they failed? So just because you failed at one thing doesn't mean you're a failure in everything. And it's irrational. It's completely irrational to believe that. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
So do you think that, so I'm talking about medicine, and I'm remembering the podcast with Sam was typically in kind of the Southeast Asian demographic population, being a doctor, engineer, lawyer is a big thing, right? Do you think failure is amplified for those students that don't get into a particular university or particular degree, where when you have this approval, the need for approval from others, that a small failure can somehow be amplified and turned into a bigger failure than it is?
The pressure and the weight on the shoulders is true. It is there. So if you come from, but you have to understand the context surrounding it, right? If you come from a migrant family like we do, right? Our parents want one thing, they want stability. During the COVID pandemic, who were the people that had the most stable jobs? The people who are doctors, nurses, HCPs essentially, right? Because there was a demand for that. So many people were laid off, and so many people are being laid off now. Look at the tech industry, right? So understand the context of it first. Our parents migrated with pretty much nothing, packed their bags, came here, worked the really difficult jobs that we could never do, right? To basically give us security, give us the ability to go get a mortgage and buy a house and all of this, that, and the other. So they see it in that framework of mind, right? So you can sit there and you can say, damn, like I failed and my parents think I'm a failure. But then you can actually turn it around. In this era, our parents didn't have, for example, access to YouTube. You pick up a phone, you create a video, you get a few thousand subscribers, suddenly you're making money. Our parents never knew that existed, that route existed, right? So I think times are different. We need to let go of approval, right? So what if you fail in one industry? We know people who've failed at medicine and have done excellent work as an engineer. We know people who've gone on to become product product owners, people who have become working in Google, in all sorts of tech industry and doing amazingly well. Would you say they're failures just because they didn't become a doctor? Depends on how you see it. So just to circle back on the point, yes, the context surrounding needing that approval, and failure is amplified. But if you can make it just as well in whatever you want to do, then you can always challenge that person and say, well, am I a failure? You can sit there and say, am I a failure if I've got this, that, and the other? Just not in the industry you wanted for me. I got what I wanted for myself. That's where I stand with that. What do you think about approval and needing approval in this day and age?
So I agree with the concept that when you do something for someone else's approval and you fail to meet the objective, or you fail to achieve that goal or desired outcome you set out to achieve, it does become amplified. Because now you're not doing it for yourself, you're doing it for someone else's reason. And I think one of the easiest ways to avoid disappointment, to avoid failure to a certain degree, is realizing that you do things for your own self. It is nice to please your parents. It is nice to be known as the guy in the community that got the first house or became on the career ladder, the property ladder. But don't do things for the approval of others, because when you do fail, it is amplified. Whereas if you do something for your own thing and you're like, okay, do you know what? I failed. I gave it a good go, but it's fine. I don't really care what other people say. And I think you'll be in a better mindset. So kind of appreciating that and kind of moving on to the next thing, which I wanted to talk about, and I want to hear your point, is, can you accept the responsibility, or can you accept failure as your own doing? Is that a thing? Is that something healthy to do?
So there's two, you can look at it in two ways here, right? There's things in your control and things not in your control. You can't take, for example, responsibility for certain things that were just well out of your remit, right? You applied for a job post. Maybe you were excellent, right? But we know the world works in a very nepotistic way. Someone might be friends with the CEO, right? They're going to get that job regardless of how good you are. You might be overqualified. You might be fantastic for that same job post, and you're up against someone who's underqualified, but they're friends with the CEO. That's not in your control, all right? But I think, let's bring it back to the context of medicine and careers and things like that, right? Sitting exams, sitting interviews, applying for centralized things like medical school posts, right? Doesn't matter if you're friends with the medical school. I highly doubt you could squeeze yourself in. Maybe you can behind the scenes, I don't know, but I highly doubt it. Anyways, so talking about that, you can accept responsibility. And I think that is a healthy way to accept it. In a healthy way though, not it's all my fault in a negative thing. It's, okay, I accept responsibility that I probably wasn't good enough for this job role. I didn't prepare enough. I didn't revise enough for the exams. Like, if you don't revise at all and you go into an exam arrogant, I turned up to placement, I don't need to revise. If you fail, it's your doing. If everyone else sat down for 6 weeks with a book open, it's your fault, man. So sit down. And you have to, once you accept responsibility though, it's about pinpoint. It's not accepting responsibility for no reason. It's for an action point, right? And the action point is to identify where you went wrong and why. So if you walked into the interview and the interviewer asked questions, do you know the company's values? Well, you should have read up on the company values. So it's a learning point. Next time you go into an interview, next time you apply for a job post, wherever it may be, you might be going to work for Peerr, for example, right? I expect you to know Peerr's values, right? If you don't know Peerr's values, you just haven't done any homework. Yeah. What's your point? What's your view on accepting responsibility?
I completely agree. As in, I think you put it a good way. There's two ways of seeing it. There's things that you can control and things you can't control. And I think it's important after you face failure to accept responsibility, to understand why you failed, why you went wrong. Let's say, why you didn't get into medical school. Is it your personal statement that let you down? Is it your grades that let you down? Is it your interview that let you down? And then following up with what you said is learning from the failure and moving forward, right? Maybe you failed because you didn't talk about your work experience, or you didn't have any work experience in your personal statement, or you didn't revise hard enough in the requirement or the required grades, right? So there's always an element of accepting responsibility. And like I said, you can't expect to go into an exam not having revised just because you're naturally smart and intelligent and accept to pass it and then be disappointed when you failed.
Exactly. So moving on from that, right? So now we're talking about strategy formation, addressing what's wrong. I think one thing we also have to look at is when we fail. So we talked about processing emotion, right? So processing emotion in a positive way now. How do we flip feeling down in the gutter to becoming a bit more positive? How have you done it? What things do you resort to when you feel absolutely crap? Obviously, we talked about learning from failures and that, but just feeling the emotional aspect of it. How do you address that? What do you do?
So once you get over the initial kind of failure disappointment, you kind of come to terms with it a certain way. For me, the most important thing is, or one of the most important things I do was, I would just kind of try to take my mind off it, and I'll go and do stuff that's super fun, which is going out with my mates. So yeah, do you know what? I flopped. I didn't get the place. I didn't get the position I wanted. Do you know what? I'm annoyed. I'm pissed. Let me go out with my friends, have a good time. I don't know if that's the right way to do it or the wrong way to process it, but it's something that helps me kind of get to it. And I do think time does heal most things. Like over time, you do get used to it. You kind of learn to live with it. I don't think you get 100% over it, but you learn to live with it. But for me, I know the first thing I do is like, I'll either call my cousin or my mates or whatever, like, yo, let's jump out, let's just do something. I flopped the exam. I just want to relax and chill and have a good time.
No, I agree with that. And that there's nothing wrong with that, binging on food, watching certain movies or whatever to process it. But I think longer term, obviously, you face the issue. And that point has already been made, so I'm not going to repeat it. It's what you said, address the problems and stuff. But I think longer term, what things you can do is also work on yourself as well. It helps with emotions, it helps deal with failure, helps build your self-esteem. Like one thing I did was I went to the gym, right? Because I felt I want to feel more confident. I want to build myself up a little bit more. So I used to go to the gym, and I still go to the gym. So it's really important to me. And you know what? Mental health wise, going back onto that as well, is very important. Exercise, diet, all these good things, right? So dealing with failure, part of it is also looking after your mental health. So all the good stuff you said, you can binge watch TV, you can go out with mates, you can do whatever you like, and then exercise, diet, look into those things. And alongside, start to strategize your way back in, or then start to think, do I want to pivot my life towards something else? For example, you might have made 4 attempts at applying to medicine, not got in, but you're an excellent coder, you're an excellent engineer. Have you explored the idea of maybe working for Google? Have you maybe explored the idea of working for a startup? Have you explored what actually might fit for you? Remember, there are people, like we interviewed Sam today, he said, I did medicine and I didn't like it one bit. It didn't fit with him one bit. And he's left medicine. Is that the case for you too? But yeah, what do you think about moving on now from there?
I agree. I think there's a process, and I think acknowledging it, learning from it, kind of getting over the initial thing might be going out, exercising, running, meeting your friends, having a good time, kind of adopting coping skills is what they call it. And I think the second thing that comes in is, I think, kind of building the mindset to start again. So one of the most important things that takes a hit is your self-esteem, especially as a student that's top of the class, that wants to get into medical school. Everyone's already said for the tiers on a year, you're going to be a doctor, you're smashing, you're getting full marks, right? Your self-esteem takes a big hit. And I'm just saying for medicine because we have experience with that. It can be a job, it can be a promotion. And I think detaching the failure from your self-esteem, your confidence is important. Realizing that future endeavors won't result in failure as well. And I think one of the best things you can do is do something that isn't associated with any sort of reward or benefit or failure per se. And then you will kind of do something you enjoy, and you're not associating, going for a run or going forward. There is no risk reward, right? You can't fail walking. You can't fail walking to the park, right? In that sense. So I think, and that will pick up your self-esteem. It will boost your morale, because I think that is very important with what comes afterward. And it's like rebuilding yourself, or kind of not rebuilding yourself, but disassociating it from your personality.
Yeah, I think have confidence in yourself, man. I think there's talent and there's hard work. And talent will never be the people who are always at it and always honing their craft, right? So just be at it, get back on it, build yourself up, and you'll find that you will become good at something that fits with you. I honestly believe that there is something for everyone out there in the world. And then the next thing that we haven't said is also a lot of the things that we've been talking about has been centered on what you can do, right? But something you can do as putting your arm out, essentially, is also ask other people.
Yeah, exactly.
It's golden to just ask other people, right? If you're in medicine, ask the people ahead of you, people there, people within the industry you want to be in. Or maybe you failed and you want to talk to someone else who's failed at something similar. Reach out and ask. There are so many people out there that have failed to get into medicine this year, or failed a medical exam, or have had to leave medicine, or haven't got into a specialty training program, or have had to switch a specialty, or have failed startups. It goes on. It goes on. There's people out there. Ask them what they did, because I guarantee you there's someone ahead of you that's managed to turn their failure around and they've got a smile on their face, right? So ask for help. What do you think stops people from asking for help, though?
I think it's to do with the negative emotions you get with failure. So one of those emotions is embarrassment, shame, anxiety. When you fail, some people feel angry, some people feel very depressed and sad and disheartened. And I think when you share your failure with other people, sometimes it amplifies the failure. It just reignites that feeling of, you deal with it yourself, but as soon as you tell someone else, you're just reminding yourself of the failure. It's like you hurt yourself, you cut yourself on thingy. Why would you go back onto the same thing and cut yourself again, right? It's the same thing. Why would you want to tell people about your grief and your failures only to bring back those emotions and memories? But it may sound counterintuitive, but it does help when you seek support. It does help when you speak to someone else. Because in a way, it's coming to terms with it, acknowledging it and kind of letting it off your chest per se. So I think it does, of course, reignite those memories, but it's something important, I think, long term. In short term it may help, but in the long term I think it's more beneficial.
Exactly. So just to bring it together now, all of these things that we're talking about, emotional processing, talking about building your self-esteem, strategizing, looking at where you went wrong, fixing that, reaching out for help, asking other people. What you want to do at the end is essentially have a new perspective, have a better perspective at life. And that's where you want to reach, where you don't see failure as failure. You see it as, I went wrong somewhere. I need to fix it. And I need to find my place where I'm supposed to be. So I think it's a new perspective. You're supposed to look at it like that. How would you look at it right now, for example? So we've had previous endeavors that have failed, projects that have been successful, etc. If, say this podcast or something, say this episode gets 0 views, how do you process that? Say this episode gets 0 views. What do you do? What's your response?
So naturally I'll be upset, annoyed, because you spend time, effort, creating the content, recording it, putting it out there. But I think what I've learned, and maybe this comes with kind of experience, age, and this is an easy way to learn from others, is then it's really, why did it fail? It's going back and thinking, what did we do wrong? We might realize that we uploaded a video and there's no sound, right? We're just seeing the numbers, right? And we click on the video and realize the sound didn't get uploaded. It's just us kind of mute, right? Or the thumbnail was incorrect, or the title didn't match up to something, right? So I think going back over the failure and finding why did it fail, and I think the important bit after that is action, moving forward. How do you move forward? And I think the key thing is you don't want to repeat failures. So if we realize, we uploaded a video, we didn't put sound on, no one's watching it. Okay, now we need to be mindful when we do upload a video, check it, make sure it's working, playing properly, the sound is synced, the content's there. So I think creating a plan of action moving forward, I think that's what closes the loop in this failure circle.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to act on it. So, right. So after all of the things, changing your perspective, building your self-esteem, it's now moving forward in some sort of direction. So for example, if this video gets zero views, like you said, the first reaction is shit, like what's happened? So that's the emotional trigger. Then the next thing is, why did it go wrong? We released it at midnight, we released it at 1 a.m, people are asleep, obviously there's no views, and then it's been buried. Or we released it and didn't promote it on our other social platforms. Look at why. You fix those things. Sound quality is poor, we might have edited it very poorly. Fix those things. But the other thing is you keep going. That's it. So some of our YouTube videos have done very poorly. 20 views or something like that after a full month or something. By the time we've seen that view, we're actually on the next video already. So we're constant. You just keep moving forward, move with the times, move with the hits. So I think that's really important, to keep moving ahead in some way or another. It can be small steps, by the way. It doesn't need to be massive steps, right? Some people think you have to, so if you failed at med school, you need to go become the best investment banker at Goldman Sachs, right? No, you work your way up, build yourself in steps. Anything else to add to processing, dealing, and bouncing back from failure?
So I think we talked a lot about, as individuals, failure, but I think the one thing we should probably mention is understanding everyone fails. You're not the only person that fails. Everyone else fails on a daily basis. And some of the most successful people on this planet have had many failures. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Tiger Woods, kind of any industry, any field you go into, some of the most successful people have had probably some of the highest number of failures. So realizing that other people have had failures, you're not the only one. And failure is not an indicator for success.
100%. I think that's what we should end on. The fact that everyone fails, and anyone who says they haven't failed, they're probably lying. They're absolutely lying to you, actually. So let's finish on that. I think we've talked a lot on how to process the failure, how to bounce back. The fact that every single person fails. And you got to keep moving. You got to keep moving forwards, actioning things that to help you get you on your way. Before I close the video, Abdul, any last remarks?
Nah.
All right then. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video. Put down in the comments below, what have you failed at? How have you bounced back from it? Or are you down in the gutters a little bit and you want a little bit of support? Reach out on this video and we'll see you next week.